You can take your Bibles and go to Matthew chapter 2. 2 days ago, all around the world, millions of people celebrated the birth of Jesus Christ. At the time that he arrived, at the time God's only begotten Son was born, it was a much smaller group that celebrated the occasion. There were a handful of shepherds. There was, of course, Joseph and Mary. And sometime after the immediate event, in fact, a year and 3 months after, it was also celebrated by the Magi, travelers from the east. So much of what people have been taught, so much of what is commonly believed concerning Christmas has nothing to do with what the Bible says about what happened. The actual day of Christmas, December 25th, was not the day that Jesus Christ was born. Anybody that's ever studied it to any extent whatsoever agrees on that one. The date of December 25th has a lot more to do with a pagan festival than it does the birth of Jesus Christ. In fact, he was born at a day that now the adversary has managed to turn around and become a day that is infamous. And that's what you would expect of the adversary, because Jesus Christ was actually born on September 11th, 3 BC. Now, if you want to have something that does relate to the particular time that we're in right now, well, then you can tie in the Magi to that. Because they did arrive right around this time of year. But it was, as I say, a year and 3 months after his birth. We won't be looking at the details of all that. I highly recommend a book called Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed by Victor Paul Wirrell that goes into all of the detail of what I've just told you and will establish it for you. And it handles it from the records of astronomy, the records of history, and the scriptural records. And by the time you finish reading that, very detailed examination of those records, you'll see, without a doubt, just what I've told you. What I want to look at tonight, though, isn't the details of that, but rather a bit about the one person and his descendants that was not celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ when he found out about it. A man by the name of Herod. Herod the Great, he is referred to as in history. And if Herod was great, it was that he was great in his wickedness, great in his evil. And Herod had descendants that also were just terribly wicked. In history, you can look at different dynasties. A dynasty, a family of rulers that were just infamous for their evil, such as the Khan, Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan, that dynasty. And the Herod dynasty certainly fits into that category. By all accounts, in every way that you look at it, these were terrible, terrible people. I'd like to give you a little background before we get into the record in Matthew about Herod the Great. Herod the Great, who was the first of these Herods. And Herod was, think of it kind of like a family name, okay? Just like the Khan dynasty, think of the Herod dynasty. And it can get very confusing when you're looking at the biblical records concerning the different men named Herod or referred to as Herod. And when you start to study it in history, it gets even more confusing because there's lots of these guys, and where they show up and how they relate, it gets very confusing. In fact, I actually made a chart that I'll show you as we get into this to help sort it all out. Herod was by birth an Idumean. And that's another name for the Edomites, which was, I guess, too easy to say, so they had to come up with something harder. And you trace the Edomites all the way back to Edom, whose name originally was Esau. He had a brother. Anybody remember? Jacob. There we go. So Jacob's brother Esau, after he gets all, mad and upset because he sold his birthright to Jacob, his name is changed to Edom. And although in the record it seems like he kind of got over it, he never really did, and neither did his descendants. In fact, they held a grudge so long that long after that, when the children of Israel were on their way to the promised land, the Edomites would not let them go through that land, through their land. They wouldn't let them pass through it. And so David, when he becomes king, he kind of addresses this issue in a way. At any rate, the Edomites, they end up in that region of Palestine, and Herod comes from those people. So he is not a Jew by birth, but he is by, quote, faith or religion. Meaning, in reality, he called himself a Jew. He never really was a practicing one in any way. He didn't keep the law in any way. Herod the Great came into power as a result of his father first. His father's name was Antipater. Antipater was appointed the procurator by Julius Caesar in 47 BC. And there's a lot of history I wish I had time to go into about that. It's fascinating of when this all takes place. The Romans only come into that area in 63 BC, not that long before Jesus Christ is born. In 47, and then you have like a lot of fighting going on for a long time, and you have different Jewish rulers, the Hasmonean dynasty. And then there's this kind of fighting for Rome to really, although they've beaten them, to really take control of the area. And there's some certain supporters of him. One of them is this guy named Antipater. He's made a procurator, and that's sort of like the guy who takes care of the financial affairs of the region. Got that? His son is Herod, and Herod is immediately appointed as the governor of Galilee. And then he's later promoted following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. So Julius Caesar, you probably have seen the play or read it at some point in school. Julius Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC. Julius Caesar is the one who had appointed Antipater. And then, if you remember the play, Mark Antony and Octavius are part of a triumvirate. Mark Antony then appoints or promotes Herod the Great to be a tetrarch. You all know what a tetrarch is, right? A tetrarch is a ruler over like a fourth of a kingdom, 1/4 of it. Sometimes the term is used more loosely. So he is appointed, he is promoted. And then later on, the Roman Senate appoints him king over all of the region of Palestine. He is appointed, Herod the Great is appointed king over all of that. And that's on the recommendation of Octavian, or Octavius, or Augustus Caesar. Same guy. Now, that happens in 37 BC, and he reigns until 1 BC, although most dates will tell you 4 BC. And that happens to do with a mistake of which his death is immediately followed by an eclipse. Which eclipse? There's a number of different candidates. Most people go for the one that would be 4 BC, but they should go for the one by 1 BC, and Josephus, the historian, would collaborate that. Lots of detail here I know I'm giving you, but this is all really interesting and helps to establish a lot of what takes place here. At any rate, he reigns during that period of time. One of the positive things that Herod the Great is known for is rebuilding the temple. You have the original temple that Solomon built, and then and that's destroyed during the Babylonian captivity. And then it's rebuilt during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, right before basically the Roman occupation, during a lot of the different fighting that takes place, it's not completely destroyed, but a lot of it is broken down. So Herod comes along and he rebuilds what had been broken down and he expands it. And sometimes you'll see the temple from Jesus Christ's time being referred to as Herod's temple. And that in itself can get confusing. Is that a separate temple than the second temple? No, it's just kind of like restored. So you have the first temple, Solomon, the second temple by Ezra and Nehemiah. And Herod's temple is that same one, just fixed up, and then that's destroyed in 70 AD. All these events are very crowded in there. He built that temple. That was a good thing. He also built pagan temples. That was not a good thing. And he also put a golden eagle right outside the entrance to the temple in Jerusalem, which was also not a good thing. It was there to symbolize the strength and power of the Roman government, which he was a very great supporter of. Herod was very disliked by the Jewish people. He was not a Jew, and everybody knew of all of his terrible goings-on, his idolatry, and what just a horrible ruler he was. And he was a horrible ruler. Supporters of Herod are called Herodians. Herodians does not refer just to the family, but the supporters of Herod. And that's not just this Herod, but the later ones. And you'll see that term come up in the Gospels, where there is the Herodians are the ones that come to Jesus about the issue of taxation. Because Herod was a supporter, as were his family, of the Roman occupation. These guys did whatever they could to support Rome. And that's how they got there, how Herod got there in the first place, and he knew what side his bread was buttered on. And he did everything he could to take care of Rome, including really high taxes on the Jews for Rome. He was married to 5 different women. There was Doris. Then there was Mariam the first. I guess that name was so hard to pronounce, he had to name the next one that, Mariam the second. Then there was Malthus and Cleopatra, not to be confused with the Cleopatra of fame of Mark Antony. A different Cleopatra, she's often referred to as Cleopatra of Jerusalem. I guess that was a lot more common name than it is now. Herod executed one of those, the first Mariam, for no particular reason other than she was Jewish. She was a princess of the Maccabean line. And he ends up also executing 3 of his sons, Antipater, Aristobulus, and Alexander. Anybody that Herod at all thought could possibly be a threat to his kingdom, he executed. Helps to kind of understand his motivation that we know about later on, right? Right. The guy was paranoid. He was paranoid, and he thought that, anything that might be a threat, he didn't wait around to find out. He just had them executed. And 2 of those sons were executed because the other one, Antipater, not to be confused with the grandfather, basically convinced Herod that they were out to get him. Now, Antipater himself also gets executed before Herod dies. Here's my chart, okay? At the top, and I know you can't see this, but I'm going to post this on the Facebook page to tell the truth, so you can see it there and print it out from there. But it'll help you, I think, still follow because I've color-coded all this. You've got Herod the Great up at the top. That next row, the green boxes, are all his wives, okay? So those 5 are his wives. And then coming off of that, you have their sons. And those are all the next row blue, okay? So you've got Antipater, you've got Aristobulus, Herod Aristobulus, and Alexander, the three that all get executed. None of those end up having any authority. After Herod dies, though, 3 out of the remaining 4 sons get the kingdom. It's split up amongst 3 out of the 4 of those. One of them doesn't get any power. The one that doesn't get any power, ironically, is called Herod II, just to confuse you more. He's also known as Herod Philip I, from 27 BC to 33 AD. Now, the 3 that get power are Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip II, also known as Herod the Tetrarch. Herod Archelaus, okay, he is known as an ethnarch. Now that you've mastered tetrarch, we'll throw another one at you, ethnarch. An ethnarch, basically, he gets a half of the kingdom, and the tetrarchs, they got a quarter of the remaining. So it's split into 3. One kid gets half, the other 2, they split the rest. And we'll read about those guys more in a minute here, but let's read the record in Matthew chapter 2. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. How many wise men were there? It doesn't say. Look at it. It doesn't say 3. It doesn't say 3 there. It doesn't say 3 anywhere. Well, they brought 3 gifts, so I guess that must mean there were 3 wise men because they brought 3 gifts. No. The gifts they brought were the 3 gifts that were given when a king was born. The wise men were the magi, and that's the word it comes from, magi. And that was a group of astronomers, basically, from the land of Persia. These were guys that had been taught going generations back by Daniel, back during the time that Daniel was a captive in Persia under Cyrus. And he had taught them about the Word of God written in the stars that would foretell of the arrival of the promised seed, the Messiah. And generation upon generation, this was passed down, and they looked for that star. And then when they saw certain events happening, again, I refer you to that book, Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed, they headed out to follow where that star was, and they arrived in this region. And they arrive in this region, and they come to Herod the king, saying, verse 2, "Where is he that is born king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, or the rising, and are come to worship him." When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. This was an event that should have thrilled all Jerusalem. But Herod was troubled because Herod didn't care if this was the arrival of the Messiah. He wanted to stay in power. He didn't care about the Messiah. Again, he was pretty much a Jew in Jewish religion in name only. All he cared about was maintaining his own grasp on the throne. And those around him, they were concerned as well. Verse 4, "And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel." This is the prophecy. The prophecy in the Old Testament showed that Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, would come out of Bethlehem. Bethlehem was the city of David. Bethlehem was where David had been born. Verse 7, "Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared." He wanted to know exactly when they first saw these events in the heavens that heralded the arrival of Jesus Christ. When did you first see it? When did you head off? It took them time to travel. It took them time to get from Persia to there, and they would travel in a caravan. And that's one of the reasons why it would never just be 3 guys traveling across the desert where they'd get robbed and everything else. There's a lot of detail that I can't get into just for time's sake. And he sent them to Bethlehem, verse 8, and said, "Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also." When they heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east arising went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. God warned them, don't go back and tell Herod. Don't go back and tell Herod. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt. And be thou there, until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt. And was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." So God warns them not to go back, that Herod will kill their kid, that Herod will kill the newborn babe, the newborn Jesus. And so they listen, and they go into Egypt. Verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, of the Magi, was exceeding wroth. He was furious. And he sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coast thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, "In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not." But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Arise and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life." And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. So Herod dies. So when the wise men, when the Magi don't come back, then Herod has all the children, all the male children, 2 years old and younger, killed in the region of Bethlehem and surrounding area. Now, Bethlehem's a small city. Bethlehem is a small town, and that whole region would be a small area. The largest town in the Palestine area was, what was it? It worked out 200 acres, which works out to be about 3 miles. About 3 miles. Or maybe it was even 2 miles. 2 miles that would work out to be. 2 miles, smaller than Auburn. That's the largest. The average would be about 15 acres, which, is just it's a very small area. But all of those kids are killed from 2 years and younger, figuring out what time that the Magi said that they first saw the star. That's why he left a margin of error there, but that's why he went up to that age, because it had been some time. All just to try to kill Jesus Christ. When he dies, which is just 3 months later, Herod dies just 3 months later, then God tells Joseph that he can go back into Israel. Now we meet the next Herod in verse 22. But when he heard that Archelaus, who is also known as Herod Archelaus, did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Now, Archelaus is one of the sons of Herod. Archelaus was the one who was the ethnarch that got a whole half of the kingdom. The rest of it was divided between Herod Antipas, who is not a good guy either, we'll find out about him next time, and Herod Philip II, also Herod the Tetrarch. Herod the Tetrarch rules over Iturea and Trachonitis. Herod Antipas rules over Galilee and Perea. So Archelaus was the one that was ruling over Judea, and that's where Bethlehem was. So Joseph doesn't go back there. And I'll show you on the map. This map is Palestine under the Herods. You see, this whole area is the kingdom of Herod. Down here is Idumea. He was an Idumean, right? Right above that, this is the region of Judea. Judea, this is part of where he ruled. That's in Judea is Jerusalem. Bethlehem's in that area. Above it is Samaria. Way up to the north here is Galilee, okay? Iturea, the other one we mentioned, that's not even part of this province. That's under Syria, but that was under his rule as well. So Galilee is way up north. So you see, he was going to go, coming out of Egypt, he was going to go to Judea, but when he heard that Archelaus was ruling in Herod's stead and also was a threat, he instead heads up north to Galilee. So that's where he ends up. So those are the sons of Herod the Great. This Herod, Herod Antipas, the one who is the ruler over Galilee and that area, he's the one we're going to run into that's responsible for John the Baptist being beheaded. And we'll cover that record next time, as well as understanding more of the relationships between these different guys, because this is like one of those shows that you watch where, man, he marries his brother, he marries his brother's wife, who's also his niece and was his brother's niece, and it's just a mess. But we'll sort all of that out next time. In the Bible, you deal with three major Herods, okay, as far as them having a major role. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, he's the one that we read about with John the Baptist. He's also the one that Jesus Christ appears before in judgment right before he's crucified. And then it's a third separate Herod that you deal with who's responsible for James being beheaded and Peter being imprisoned. That's Herod Agrippa I. So we'll cover those next time, but the thing about it isn't to focus on what terrible bad guys the Herods were, but to recognize that nothing could stop Jesus Christ from coming. The adversary, he tried everything he could, and he tried working in these terrible people to kill Jesus Christ as soon as he was born, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't stop him from coming in the first place, and nothing's going to stop him from coming back, and that's hope we have before us. God bless you.